Super Rugby Pacific 2025 is less than 2 weeks away, and I cannot wait for this competition to get underway. A couple of reasons, really, but the main reason is because I think that the Australian teams will do a lot better than they did in 2024. But the key feature of this season is that there is obviously Super Rugby Pacific Fantasy, and I cannot wait to get into the leagues and to compete against all of you guys, along with friends and fellow podcasters and other platforms, to really make this year one hell of a year. It is going to be epic to be able to create my own Super Rugby team and to be the coach of that team, to see which players are doing well, which players are doing poorly, and that is super exciting, and I cannot wait. We do know that it's coming out this week. So that's right. Super Rugby Pacific Fantasy is coming out this week, and that's the chatter that's being said on the wires. But I also can't wait to see what kind of machinations or what things players are going to get points for, or what points are going to be deducted from where. Is it line breaks? Is it defenders beaten? Is it tries? Is it mauls? Is it rucks hit? How in depth have they gone, and how much are they going to have, that sort of rugby mentality, rugby nerd brain about the whole thing. Let's just run through what we know about it this stage before the competition actually gets underway, before the whole fantasy is launched. Let's just go through what we know so far about the competition. So you're going to have $100 million to pick a team. That's from 1 through to 15. So you don't need to worry about bench players, and you really can't afford to think about that, because I think that this competition is going to heat up really quickly. So that's right, only 1 through to 15, and there are unlimited trades. So I think that if you're completely dissatisfied with your team, or you see that there's a complete new wave of players that you haven't even considered, doing well, then you can make unlimited trades. You can trade the whole 15 for another 15 the following week. It's going to be super exciting. And the best thing is that with injuries and, having to stay on top of the news and all that kind of stuff, you can make trades right up until kickoff for the first game of the weekend. So that's really good, and that means that you need to keep in the loop, and you need to keep on top of all the different news for the boys that you've picked. And I'm really excited, because that may drive just another level of interest for the competition. Now, to break all of this down, I've brought in fellow podcasters and fellow content creators, the Scrumbags boys, to be able to interview them, to chat about what they're excited about for fantasy. And I spoke with Mitch, and that's on the other side of this. We saw that in the Ireland test, we saw that in the England test. It was a really tight game, and so I whack it up there it is. Now there's a little bit of chat about the fact that if you're needing to get creative, like, get Scribe, you know the rest. Drive pod. Mitch, how you doing?
Yeah, really good. Thanks for having me on, John. I'm always excited to talk anything rugby related, and this new fantasy platform that's coming up soon is something new for Super Rugby fans. So keen to have a bit of a chat about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's something that I'm looking forward to, and something that I've definitely been searching for. And I got a taste out of it with the World Cup in 2023. That was really good. And I guess what I want to ask from you straight up is, how good is it to have fantasy in Super Rugby Pacific back?
Yeah, it's awesome. For those who haven't played any form of sort of sports fantasy before, I know there's like NRL Super Coach out there, and I've dabbled a little bit in that. But in the last sort of since we started up Pick and Drive in the last few years, we had our own fantasy competition that we've kicked off, and we've been running that kind of analog really in the last few seasons. We do it all ourselves with spreadsheets and that kind of thing. And what's really good about that I've been able to, I haven't been into fantasy in other sports before. I am predominantly a rugby person. But what is so exciting about that offering is that not only do you get to watch your team, so if you're a Waratahs fan like we are, you're already going to tune in and watch Waratahs every week on Stan Sport. But what fantasy does is it actually makes you aware of the other comps in the other games in the competition, and the players in other competitions. You can't just have in any platform just a team full of Waratahs players. They make you only, we don't know at this point what the platform is going to feature, but most likely you'll only be able to pick 2 or 3 or maybe 4 at most players from each team. So you start drafting together a team of players from across the league and the competition, New Zealand players, Fijian players, Tongan players as well with Moana Pacifica, and you just all of a sudden become a little bit more interested in those games. Whereas if you're just a Waratahs fan, like I said, you tune in on Friday night to watch them, like round 1 playing against the Highlanders. but then you might tune in on Saturday to see how the Brumbies or the Reds go because you've got, two Brumbies players that are in your fantasy team. So it just opens up that avenue to have a little bit more engagement across the competition, and a little bit more just an understanding as a fan of the different teams in the competition, and who are the big movers and shakers as the comp moves on. So it's just another element of engagement, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And I think, as you say, the point that you drew on there straight away, that this broadens your scope or your optics for what you're looking at in Super Rugby Pacific. So your team may very well be the Western Force or it may be Moana Pacifica, but then all of a sudden, because you've got a center pairing from the Highlanders, then all of a sudden you've got to watch them. And if they're playing, you might actually be almost betting against your own team in a way because you
Yep.
want your fantasy team to do really well. And I think that's the really intriguing thing, that you have to all of a sudden get to know the players, which I think also is going to help if the super teams like they did last year stepped up on their social media content, because you're
Mm-hmm.
picking players obviously based on the stats that I think that will govern the way that the points work.
Yep.
And that's another thing that's important to mention here. We don't actually know yet how the metrics are going to work, which machinations, which combination is going to work the best. And we also don't know
Mm.
exactly how many players we're going to be able to pick from one team, because I think there's probably a couple of diehard fans out there who just pick a full team of the Blues or full team of the
Yeah.
Brumbies. So we're not really sure
Yep.
yet.
Yep.
But I think also one of the most exciting things, and tell me if you agree or not, Mitch, but is that you can actually become a major nerd and you can let your
Mm.
inner nerd out with this. And then you can delve deep into the numbers and you can delve deep into the games. And then all of a sudden have the upper hand because it's measured on how much you love it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Like you really can, like you said, you can dive right into the specifics, and like you did say, we don't know at this point what the scoring systems are, but for other codes in the fantasies that we've used in the past, it relies a lot on like it breaks it down into position specifics as well. So you've got like second rowers who hit rucks, and so if they hit a certain number of rucks, they get a certain number of points, which is obviously going to be more important to a second rower to do that than a fly half. But at the same time, like if you get a prop who scores a lot of tries, a prop scoring a try might give you 5 points, whereas a fly half or a fullback scoring a try might give you two. And so all of a sudden, you want those props who are going to score tries. Like I remember a few years back, Harry Johnson Holmes was scoring lots of pick and go tries for the Waratahs, and so he was very highly sought after as a fantasy player because he was going to give you lots of points each week purely from that aspect. So you can definitely dive in, and if you know rugby and you know how position specific or players do certain things in certain positions, you can definitely geek out and really build your squad based on the really nitty gritty stuff, which is awesome.
Oh, it's so exciting. Yeah, I can't wait. I actually can't wait. That's another thing we just have to say straight up. Just so exciting. Finally, we get a chance to be able to build our own team, be our own coaches, all with a salary cap, but every coach plays with a salary cap in the world, except for the French teams. They seem to have an endless
Or the
large
Western
sombrero like
Force.
the Roosters. Sorry, what was that, Mitch?
Yeah, all the Western Force. They don't seem to have a salary cap the last few seasons.
Yeah, but I can let that slide. I love just footy being out there in the West. But we'll jump in. I'm not gonna get you to rattle off a whole side right now because we don't know the machinations. But who are five key players that you think that you're gonna have in round one, just off the bat?
Yeah, so again, this goes into we don't know what the scoring system is, but based on what we've used on our pick and dry fantasy the last few seasons, Angus Bell was one player that I always go to. He's a player that
He's gonna be
he
expensive.
does. He can be expensive, but he's worth it. He brings you points because not only is he a great scrummager, but he has that running game. And so when he makes line breaks and when he makes tackle busts, those are the sort of things that can start ticking you points over quickly. So he's probably one of my first. Damien McKenzie's another one that I always go to. I had him the last 2 years in my fantasy team, and he got me through to the grand final last year, and thankfully we won it. But he's definitely another player that I'd be going straight for. Mark Taylor is another one who for the Blues has been incredible the
Oh man,
last
he's
few seasons, and
untouchable. He's crazy.
not only is he untouchable, but he's racking up 50, 60 points for your team every week in fantasy. So he's another player that a lot of people. I know Ando's got a soft spot for him because he's also been Ando's first draft for the last few seasons, and no doubt we'll try and get that in a few weeks when we have our draft.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. It'll be interesting to see because there are obviously the well-known entities just like the Bowden Barretts, who are just great. The Rico Ioanis, the Mark Talias, as you've mentioned. You've got the Tom Wrights, probably going to be a very sought-after fullback. And then, as you say, Angus Bell in the prop forwards. Tamati Williams, another big tackle-busting forward that scrummages well and has now showed that on the international test scene. But I want to delve in and get a little bit of a feel and then maybe give a little bit of a secret away. Who is the one player, the dark horse player, one or two, you take your pick, who you think that you'd pick that could potentially really shine in 2025 and give you those secret points to give you the boost and give you the lead in the leagues that you'd be joining as scrumbags.
So the player that I always go for is Angus Bell. Like I said before, he's a good scorer and does get points. But someone who's maybe a bit of a dark horse, who we haven't seen a lot of the last few years, but I'm expecting a big season from, is Rob Leota. I think he's going to be quite pivotal to the Waratahs' success this season. And he, again, is the type of player that, whether he plays second row or in the back three, he will be the type of player that breaks tackles, but also makes a lot of tackles, has a lot of ruck involvements, potentially will score a lot of tries as well. So, I mean, if the Waratahs had their trial yesterday, if you saw some of that, Dan McKellar is known for his mauling and his scrummaging, and that was something that they spoke about a lot and scored a fair few tries through the maul. I expect he might be on the back of some of those tries as well. So I think Rob Leota would be a secret dark horse to pick and might get you a few good points early on in fantasy. But again, we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, no, it's super exciting. There are probably a couple of people that want to draft in the junkyard dog round one straight up,
Yep.
put him on the wing. The young gun who absolutely lit it up. Then obviously I think there's a few people who've got some soft spots for maybe someone like Dylan Peach out in the
Yep.
West. Yeah, then you're looking at the halfbacks. Tate McDermott probably gives you some running meters, but then what are they going to be scored on? As we said, we don't really know yet, but it's all going to be fascinating to see how deep people can dive in the super fantasy and really what they can get out of it because I can't wait. And the banter in the group chats is going to be going off because there's going to
Yep.
be so much
For sure.
sledging, and I can bet that you and Lockie especially, if you guys you're gonna be hurling some words. I can imagine if
For
things go
sure.
well for you guys
For
round one.
sure. Yeah, for
So,
sure.
Mitch, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. And I know I've been told now through the comms teams that it's looking like a first week of Feb launch. So that's going to be
Okay.
super exciting. So
Good to
people,
hear.
it's tangible. It's so close. We can almost touch it. So everyone needs to keep an eye on all the trials that are coming up and that have been
Mhm.
played. And then they also just need to get straight into their super fantasy and start picking their players.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And again, I think it's going to be one of those things where it might be a bit of a slow start. I think with fantasy, people not too sure how it works, and 2025 is going to be a bit of a tester year for it. But it has such potential. I think 2026 will be the year that it really does take off. 2025, they'll be ironing out some creases and seeing how it works. But if you are into rugby and you are into Super Rugby specifically, do share the word. Do get your mates involved because this type of competition only works well if we get buy-in from fans. And the players will be buying in. The administrators have done their work in the background to put in a platform for us. So let's utilize it. Let's make it worth its while because if we don't, as fans, it very well could not feature in 2026, 2027, and that would be a big shame.
Absolutely wise words there, Mitch. Mitch from Scrumbags and Pick and Drive Pod. Thank you so much for coming on, and we will see each other on the fantasy ladder.
Sounds good. Thanks, John.
Mitch and the Scrumbag boys are just a great bunch of lads and they love their rugby. And I'm so happy that there are other content creators out there who really want to make it their own to be able to bring more rugby to the likes of you and me because, you know, what else would we be without people loving the game that they play in heaven? So you can find all those boys' content on Instagrams at Scrumbags and Pick and Drive Pod, but you can also find them on Spotify, and that's where you listen to their podcast, or at least that's where I listen to their podcast. And then you can also head on to the other platforms that support podcasts, and you can find them there as well, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm sure they will have the places if you follow them on Instagram or on X, or if you get around them individually or not on the Spotify platforms, I'm sure they'll be able to have all their links and all their connections on there, so you can just go right and get in deep. I believe they also may be supporting a Discord chat this year as well, so you can get on that if you're on Discord. And then just going through quickly who I think will be a key player, or those key players who will be part of possibly my Super Rugby Pacific fantasy team. I don't actually know. We don't know yet at the time of this recording this video what is going to make a player really good and worth lots of points and what not. But I think the key is that if the deeper that you can get in the numbers, the nerdier that you can get on all of this sort of content, the better, because it's going to be really important to be able to know what makes a player tick. And that also comes down to who that player is playing against. So if a stronger team is playing against a weaker team, but they've got perhaps a young gun. So I'm going to whip out one of the ones the Super Rugby Pacific media guys have picked out, this guy from the Highlanders. A lot of people in Australia probably don't know who he is, and maybe not a lot of people in New Zealand know who he is. But someone like this is probably not going to be worth as much, because the calculations, the way that they've calculated the values for each player is, through simulations on last season's data and adjustments made for injuries and et cetera, et cetera. So a player that was really injured last year, or perhaps wasn't even playing, such as, they might be worth an absolute mozza in points, but they actually might not be blowing your salary cap out like someone like a Damon McKenzie or Beauden Barrett or Tom Wright. Even though they're some of the most exciting players and you want all of them in your team, it just may be a little bit difficult to fit them all under that sombrero, because we have just been given 100 million. We are not as fortunate as the rich clubs in France. So we've got to do what we can with what we've got. And so that's really exciting. So I think it's really important to consider also how a more unknown player playing in a position like a wing, how well they'll do if they have an experienced player like Beauden Barrett inside them, or Damien McKenzie. So it's not always about picking the star-studded players. It might be picking and selecting those players in and around the star-studded players that will actually give you the points. Although I'm sure Damien McKenzie and Beauden Barrett and the like, Tom Wright, etc., will give you lots of points. But without knowing too much about the machinations and the different things, the matrix that will give you points, I think it's a fair shout to just say to make sure that you watch as much rugby as you can, get across all the teams, and that way you can win all the comps, and you can win, if there's prize money out there for it somewhere, then you can win that too. But I think it's also important to note that myself and Scrumbags will be hosting separate leagues, and will also be part of each other's leagues leading into the season, is what we've said. So that's super exciting, and I can't wait to compete against you guys, and I can't wait to just talk about rugby, talk about the teams, and then talk about how that's going. So that's going to be really exciting. We're going to be really enjoying the Super Rugby Pacific fantasy build-up as well as the season build-up, and then we are going to be getting into the season proper on 14th of Feb. I can't wait to see you all on there. I'll catch you guys on the ladder.